Hello, everyone, and welcome to Leaders in Payments podcast. I'm your host, Greg Myers. And as many of you know, embedded finance has quickly become one of the most important conversations in payments and fintech. More vertical software companies are looking beyond their core platforms and exploring how payments and other financial products can create new revenue, strengthen customer relationships, and deliver a more seamless experience. It is also the focus of Embeddify, the Embedded Finance Summit I'm hosting on October 13th in Lehi, Utah, where vertical SaaS leaders, technology providers, and industry experts will come together to discuss how embedded finance is being built and deployed in the real world. We'll be talking not only about payments, but also lending, banking, insurance, accounting, and payroll. You can learn more at embeddify2026.com. As we lead up to the event, I'm talking with industry leaders who are helping software companies navigate the embedded finance opportunity. Joining me today is Ankita Chowdhry, the AI product lead at Payabli. So Ankita, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the show.
Hi, Greg. Thanks for having me.
All right, well, let's start with a little bit about your background and how did you get into AI and machine learning and what led you to Payabli?
Yeah, sure. Happy to give a bit of background there. So I studied computer science in undergrad. And, during that time, the first couple of years are really a structured curriculum. And then you have an opportunity to take a few more elective type courses. And I was just always really fascinated by machine learning and kind of just the way that using a ton of data and kind of mimicking how the brain sort of works with neural networks and that, you could get a machine to do pattern recognition at like very, incredible speeds and things. So I took a lot of classes at that point in machine learning, AI, deep learning, just because I wanted to satisfy that curiosity. And then I think it was also just a little bit of luck because one of the internships I did at Facebook, they sort of match you to teams using a survey that you fill out. And I, wrote that I was interested in machine learning and AI. And I, happened to luckily get matched to the ML team there building their machine learning models for ads. So I spent the summer there sort of working on building an ML model for one of their ads things to sort of reduce the bounce rate when people are clicking through ads. And that was my first introduction to ML in production, kind of going from learning about it in theory and doing it in production and really enjoyed that. So I continued by joining Facebook after graduating, staying on that same team, working on sort of capacity planning for ML models, creating the experimentation platform, and just in general, a lot of things for learning about ML at scale. And yeah, I just continued to stay really interested in tech, but also like AI and worked at a couple of different startups. And then ultimately I joined business school in 2023, which was around the time when ChatGPT was and kind of all the other Gen AI tools were starting to pick up a lot of steam and getting really popular. And so I think it was a great time to be in school and have the opportunity to deep dive into those tools, talk to professors and business leaders to figure out how they're thinking about implementing AI in their tools and leveraging it and how it might change business. And so yeah, that was how I sort of then continued my learnings, I guess, in the AI space. And I knew coming out of business school that I wanted to join a company where I'd have the opportunity to do a similar kind of thing as what I did with like the ML early in the day, which was take it and understand it from school and using it on my own time and putting it into practice at a business. And so while I was in business school, I worked with a few venture funds and actually met an investor who ultimately is also an investor in Payabli. And he's who introduced me to Joe and Will. And so that's how I got introduced to Payabli. And and speaking to them early on, I think it was really awesome how bullish they were about AI and wanting to invent a future with, AI and payments where it was really deeply embedded in it. And so it was kind of a good fit, to sort of join Payabli and work with them to build out their AI suite and AI tools and figure out sort of also how internally within the company we leverage AI and use it to build faster and things. And so that's kind of how I got started with AI and ML and then also ended up at Payabli.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. So I'm really curious about it and excited for this conversation because we're kind of putting together two big topics, right? We've got AI, which everyone's talking about, and we've got the whole embedded finance area, which everyone's talking about. So putting them together for this episode is going to be a lot of fun. So as you mentioned, there's a lot of talk about AI-powered payments. So where is AI genuinely making a difference today and where is it mostly hype?
Yeah, that's a fair question. I think, specifically with payments, it's important to think about how AI prior to all the Gen AI and sort of more like reasoning and LLMs, there was still ML, right? And I think that's in payments actually always been there, and it's been there for quite a while. So in that sense, I think AI in payments and AI powered payments continues to mature in that area most prominently. And so where it's really making a difference are in a lot of those areas where ML was already making a difference, from risk, underwriting, and those types of more operational workflows that have high volume and require a lot of interaction sort of from a human lens. And so I think where we're seeing the reasoning models come into play is going really from those ML and rules that sort of are playing a role in risk, and now kind of moving to how do we go from that and actually start handling items in a queue, getting a model to maybe review those before a human takes a look. And so I think that's where we're starting to see a lot of movement and actually impact being driven from AI powered payments. I think in terms of hype, I would say it's more like a sliding scale where it's like more experimental versus more in production. And I think maybe more of the experimental realm right now is what I would think is like agentic commerce. And I think that has been a huge topic of conversation, in this year, 2026. And specifically for e-commerce, I think my take is that, we're seeing a lot of movement on the infrastructure side with, new protocols or like networks coming out with toolkits for agentic commerce and processors working with big AI labs and that kind of thing. But I think there still is like a behavioral gap sort of in a way for consumers to actually start handing over, their payment credentials to an agent. AI shopping is still very much like, let the AI find what I need to buy, but then I'll still ultimately come in at the checkout. And so I think that the infrastructure in that realm is maybe a bit ahead of the actual volume. But I think, still within agentic commerce, one area that I'm really excited about, and I think maybe we'll hopefully start seeing some more hype in the coming months is agentic commerce for B2B. Because I think like for B2B payments, like paying your vendors or, paying your business records and things like that, it's a much more finite solution space. So I think like that behavioral problem is less of a hurdle to get over. And so I think that there's a lot of interesting applications there, and I'm really excited about that particular area too.
Yeah, totally agree. I hear a lot of people say the same thing, that the B2B side might lead a little bit over the consumer side. So as we talk about embedded finance, as you well know, it creates this unique opportunity to combine both financial data and operational data. So what becomes possible with AI when you combine those two?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think especially embedded finance within like vertical SaaS, you have so much operational data about like how that vertical sort of runs from end to end. And yeah, I mean, I think it unlocks a lot of very interesting use cases. The first one I think is related to what I was mentioning earlier, where those workflows that historically used a lot of ML for like risk and underwriting and using that to score things, but ultimately a human still needs to go in and actually review cases that maybe fall into a gray area. I think adding operational data that you now have and including sort of these reasoning models that we have with more generative AI, you can actually now, I think, get to a point where some of those cases get to be reviewed without necessarily needing human intervention at the outset. And you can kind of gather information about those cases. Because a lot of times I think operational data can be slightly more unstructured maybe than that financial data as well. And I think, generative AI is uniquely positioned to be able to help make sense of that. And so I think in some of those workflows, you get a good synergy of those types of data. But I think another way that we're starting to, at least at Payabli, like trying to start using both of these types of data is really in helping, these vertical SaaS companies be more proactive in sort of understanding what they're seeing from their data and how can they take action on something in a financial sort of landscape before it becomes, sort of an issue. And so I think if a partner, has a set of merchants that recently onboarded and, they're lagging transactions or something like that compared to others in their peer set, we can use that sort of operational data that we know to sort of, float that to the partner and kind of talk about how can we improve merchant activation or that kind of thing. And so I think that's where you can be a little bit more unique with leveraging both types of data.
Well, as you know, in the vertical SaaS space, some of the bigger vertical SaaS companies, they'll take on some of the risk and they'll build payments teams. Others will outsource that to companies like Payabli or other payment partners. So how do you see AI changing the way payments teams approach areas like risk, compliance, and underwriting?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's in a really big way. I think in the same way that those were the areas that got the most impacted by machine learning and kind of helping to manage all the massive amounts of volume that come in, massive amounts of data to sift through. I think similarly, we're seeing those areas get impacted by generative AI. I think a lot of payments companies, used to need to hire, big teams to keep up with the volume that's ever growing. But I think now with the ability for some of these tools to come in and gather additional context from those operational data that we were talking about per transaction or per case, do some reasoning based on how, our analyst teams were doing reasoning before, and then make a suggestion, for what could happen with this case, especially in things where there's lower risk, starting to actually potentially auto action on those and reduce the workload, essentially manual workload on the teams doing it. And I think we're starting to see also from like a regulatory landscape, like more and more these tools are being, I guess, promoted to sort of have some of the, L1 type risk things be handled more autonomously. And so I think these are areas that we're going to start seeing a lot more autonomous work, but it's also very important then for these tools to be built in a way that's super safe and has the right guardrails in place. And it's not just sort of a tool that is spitting out anything from any LLM. It's trained specifically using information on a team that has actually worked these cases. And so that's also what we're thinking about at Payabli. And, luckily we have an internal operations side that handles a lot of the risk and underwriting for some of our partners. And so we get a lot of learnings through that we can then embed in agents and that sort of thing.
I grew up in the payments industry. We always had dashboards and reports, and they tend to catch things after they've happened. And so how does AI help identify things or prevent them from happening? So what does that start to look like when AI goes from, what's happened in the past to, hey, we can actually prevent it from ever happening?
I mean, I would love for that to be the case. And that's where we want to build towards. Because I think ultimately, in the future, people running these payments businesses aren't necessarily going to have that payments background. They're going to come in, they're building an entire, software business, and payments is one leg of it. And they need to manage that business too. And so if we can provide the ability for them to proactively know when something's going to happen, I think that would be a huge improvement to the user experience. And so, I think it's what we've been talking about, really, like the combination of the operational data and the financial data, and being able to have an agent that is trained to look for very specific things on a daily basis, and then surfacing that to the customer. I think an example that, we want to work towards at Payabli is, for example, disputes. If you notice a merchant or a partner that is approaching a chargeback rate that's slightly elevated, and then that might lead to some processing issues, we could have an agent that starts monitoring those transactions, noticing when a transaction comes in that has properties that are similar to disputes that might have happened in the future or chargebacks that might have been filed in the past. And then, proactively suggesting to the merchant, hey, this may result in a chargeback. Potentially at this point, we would suggest proactively refunding, and something like that. And so you can get to a point where you can protect the merchants and the partners who might not have as much payments and finance experience to be able to do things without necessarily needing to wait until they've happened.
Well, this next one is kind of, I think, a big question that there's a lot of conversations around. So for a vertical SaaS company, how should they decide what AI capabilities they should build themselves versus buy from a partner?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think that there's a few simple heuristics to think about. And I think I think a lot of companies at this point are going to be needing to offer some sort of AI products to their customers, right? For those same reasons we talked about, proactively identifying things, the ability to ask questions in natural language without needing to sort of hunt around, a UI and that kind of thing. And so I think every company is going to need to have some sort of offering in this way. And where I think it makes sense to build is really for those types of tools that ultimately are going to directly touch your end customer, and your end customer will be interacting with on a regular basis. Whether that is, a chatbot in this example might be the best one to describe, because you'd want to control the way that chatbot interacts, the actual responses it gives, the mechanisms that it can use, what actions it can take. And more often than not, that that chatbot or that agent that you're making accessible to your end customer is going to need to touch all parts of your business. So that could be payments, that could be the CRM that you've built for them, that could be the scheduling feature, all of those different types of things, which on your back end might have different vendors, but to your customer should look like one seamless sort of interface, right? And so you'd want to build one AI tool that they can interface with that you ultimately control. And I think for that to be possible, like as a software, builder and in building a vertical SaaS company, it's important that you pick vendors that offer you the tools to be able to embed like their operational data that you will need for your agent into their own agent. And similarly, I think on the potentially on the buy side, where things are less customer facing and more like back office. And so again, we talk about, there's a payment side, there's a CRM, there's a scheduling, you might build many other features for your customers. If it's more on the payment side and you are managing your own risk, let's say for your business, potentially purchasing like a risk ML system or risk rules system, or in this case, like a risk agent system, which I've been talking about a little bit, right? For handling the queue and managing sort of the cases that come in. And that made more sense to buy, because at that point also what you're getting is not just the agent itself, but you're getting all the sort of knowledge that's baked in from this payments company that has worked on a bunch of different types of industries and maybe more companies in your same vertical. So you have the benefit of that more like consortium level data rather than trying to build that for yourself with your minimal sort of focus. And so I think what it really comes down to for build versus buy is like how much domain expertise is required for this particular feature, and do you have it, or is it better purpose from someone else like a vendor, and how much is it going to interface directly with your customer, because then that's the amount of control you would want to exert on it is a lot more in that way. So I think it's important also to find vendors that can enable you to do both by providing you the tools to either pick up an agent or use an AI feature off the shelf just for your back office, or to leverage and embed an AI tool like an MCP or something to gather that information, but in your own agent that you are building.
What is actually difficult about implementing AI, and where does the reality get harder than the theory?
You can talk about it specifically for payments, but I think in general, like implementing AI is just hard, right? I think it's difficult, especially going from, I would say, experimentation to, productionization and particular, like when you're building the experiment or you're building the harness for what this AI tool could do, it's very easy to create like a workflow, essentially. Like, and I kind of call these workflow vaporware, in that they are, they're loops that are running, but ultimately what they're spitting out is like a generic LLM's response or something. It doesn't really have the brain that I think is necessary to actually move the needle. And so really what it comes down to, moving from experimentation to productionization, is like the accuracy, the precision, the metric moving, and the impact that this AI feature or agent is having on the workflow you're trying to improve. And so I think the way that we try to do this at Payabli is we're just really metric driven when it comes to these AI features and agents, rather than sort of building something that looks like very interesting and shows a big summary of the case, to tell someone, hey, we could do this or we could do this. It's really like, okay, after that summary, what did the analyst then do? Did they approve it? Did they reject it? And did it match what the agent actually suggested? And we want to get that number, that agreement rate, really high. I think for us to, deploy an agent and be comfortable with it, we have very high bar for what that metric should be. And doing that takes time. It takes time and it takes effort as well from the internal operations team to provide that feedback. But ultimately, like that's the only way I think to move from an agent in experiment mode to an agent in production mode. So, and that's why we talked about the build versus buy thing. Doing something like, building your own payment specific agent or something requires a lot of that, precision and accuracy and testing. And so looking to find a vendor that provides you with something that has been tried and tested and has, guardrails, configurations all in place based on rigorous internal testing, I think is super important.
Well, Payabli has been building your AI capabilities directly into the infrastructure rather than sort of treating it as a separate tool. So why did you take that approach, and what have you learned from doing it that way?
Yeah, I'll start with like the why. I mean, I think, generally Payabli has always viewed themselves and ourselves as like, the infrastructure for payments, like the AWS of payments. You can kind of do any sort of function you need to within embedding payments within Payabli. And so similarly, I think, we view the future of payments as having AI embedded across all parts of that. There's just so many pieces of payments that is ripe for automation, right? There's a lot of manual workflows. There's a lot of things with a lot of data. As we mentioned about, earlier, there's a lot of opportunities for proactivity. So there's just a lot of areas that AI could make a huge difference in. And so I think because of that and that view that we want Payabli to continue representing the infrastructure for payments, we really want AI to be at the forefront of every single piece that, could possibly be AI-ified with payments. And so that's kind of the why. And then I think in terms of how or why, what we've done to do that is really we've taken the approach of sort of building an internal AI infrastructure layer that powers all of the different AI features and agents that we have across the spectrum within the product. And what that does for us is it unlocks not only the ability to have multiple AI features and agents across the portfolio, but it also enables internal velocity and giving our internal developers the opportunity from different teams and that kind of thing to be able to add AI functionality to products that, maybe didn't have it to begin with, or to include it from the outset much more quickly and with the guardrails baked in and making sure that PII is scrubbed out, that we have cost tracking, all of these types of things automatically built in so that it's all doing it in one seamless sort of infrastructure. And then similarly, I think what that enables is that every new agent or AI feature that comes up compounds on itself because we can leverage things like the agent-to-agent protocol and have them actually interact with one another. So, the insights agent can talk to the risk agent, can talk to the disputes agent, and really start to actually have a world in which agents are running the payments business. And that's what we eventually, sort of want to get to. So by building the AI infrastructure layer in that way, rather than sort of building an AI feature here and there, we feel like we can unlock not only the future of AI in payments, but also just internal velocity and developer efficiency in that way.
Okay. That's a great segue into the next question. Let's talk about the future. So looking ahead 12 to 18 months, what do you think will change the most about AI and embedded payments? And what do you think won't really change that much?
So I'm not a fintech veteran. I think Payabli is my first foray into fintech. But I think what astounded me when I joined and sat in on sales calls and things, it's obviously a very heavily regulated space, and there's a lot of things to think about there. And there's a lot of jargon. And when you're a new company starting out and you want to embed payments into your product, but you don't have that fintech background, it can be super daunting, and that's why you kind of need someone on your team who has a payments background and that sort of thing. Maybe this is my, coming from the outside world view, but I think that, eventually we'll get to a point where embedding payments should be as simple as, asking an agent, given my operational plan and my vertical that I'm operating in, what services do I need to enable? What risk profile and policy should I enable? And then, I'm turning myself on, I'm able to do that, And so I think it's removing a lot of the decision making, removing a lot of the friction involved in getting started. And then similarly, I should be able to log on and see a single pane glass view of, okay, what's going on in my payments business today? And, these agents have asked me that I need human approval for these specific items. Let me go in and do those, but let me also go and see what else the agent did in the last few days. So I know it sounds very sci-fi, but I feel like there is a world in which this isn't just the case for payments. I think it might be the case in a lot of different industries where there's, some reduction of manual work and reduction of friction in order to get things set up. Just the barrier to build has dropped so much, and so I think that'll continue to be the case for a lot of things, especially as people now want to embed payments as part of their business at the outset. What won't change? Well, I think the fact that it is a heavily regulated industry, that's, I think, not going to change. I think that's important for it to be there. We're handling money movement, so it's very important. And so I think, things like risk, underwriting, dispute management are always going to be there. And I think they'll just continue to evolve with whatever technology comes out to sort of handle those things again in a more automated fashion. And I think we're just going to continue to move towards there. But the actual functions that need to happen within a payments company, I don't think should change all that much.
Well, one final question. So if you could get every vertical SaaS company and platform, bank or payments company to understand one thing about AI and payments, what would that be?
Well, I think honestly, it's really just what we've been talking about, which is that I think that AI and payments, payments is just one of the industries that's just so ripe for automation. Having looked at a bunch of different industries and worked in AI and other spaces, I just think that the amount of workflows that are currently still manually run and can, continue to be very intensive in that way are, the perfect kind of grounds for this type of this automation. And so I think it's really about, having people, first of all, think that they can include payments as part of their business. So, embedding payments is really, should be a core part of building any business today. It's a revenue stream that shouldn't be overlooked. But then also, I think embracing automation and embracing the fact that, a lot of this might change, but trying to build from that with that mindset from the outset and partnering with vendors that feel the same way. And so that you can kind of future-proof yourself and take advantage of the wave. And yeah, I'm super excited about it. I hope other people are as well.
Yeah, I think it's a huge part of the conversation, not just the embedded payments, the AI, and I think you did a great job of kind of wrapping up what people should really be thinking about. So thank you so much for being here today. I know your time's very, very busy and very valuable. So again, thank you so much for sharing all your insights and being on the show.
Thank you so much, Greg. It was great chatting with you.
You too. And to all you listeners out there, thank you for your time as well. And until the next story. But before we go, we have to mention Embeddify, which is coming up on October 13th. So to learn more about the event where a lot of these AI discussions are also going to be happening, please visit embeddify2026.com.